There is a particular quality to the moment of waking in a tent. It is unlike waking anywhere else, not the gradual surfacing from the comfort of a bed, not the abrupt alarm-triggered consciousness of a workday. Waking in a tent is more animal than that. Your body returns from sleep into a complete environmental awareness before your mind has finished booting. The sounds reach you first. Canvas flexing, insects. The specific silence or fullness of the world outside the thin fabric wall. Then the temperature. Then the light or the dark, filtered through nylon. And then, if everything is as it should be, nothing else. Just you and the sleeping bag, and the small breathing space of the tent, and the forest, or the meadow, or the lakeshore outside. If everything is as it should be, the morning it was not as it should be. The last thing my returning consciousness registered, the thing that dragged me from sleep into a kind of awareness I've never fully recovered from, was a weight, a presence. The shadow of something between me and the pale gray light of the tent. Fabric above my face, something standing over me, still, patient, watching me sleep. My name is Theo Callard. I'm 31 years old. I work in supply chain management for a furniture company. I drive a sensible car and own a sensible apartment, and have never, in my adult life, experienced anything that I could not eventually account for with patience. And reason I am telling you this, so you understand. What it cost me to believe what happened at Millhaven Lake in western Montana last September. To believe it not as a story I tell and half dismiss, but as something real that I carry. Something that changed the way I understand the difference between being alone and being watched. This is what happened. The trip was Gordy's idea, which was true of most things in our group that involved the outdoors and any degree of risk. Gordon Fitch was 33. Structural engineer with the build of someone who had played college lacrosse and the personality of someone who had genuinely enjoyed it, loud in the good-natured way. Generous with his enthusiasm, the kind of person who makes every group activity feel like the right decision until it stops being the right decision. At which point he is also genuinely useful to have around. Gordy had found Millhaven Lake. On a topographic map, during a long weekend of researching remote fishing spots in western Montana, it was not a famous lake. It did not appear on any of the standard outdoor recreation databases he usually consulted. It showed up on the USGS topographic as an unnamed body of water, roughly half a mile long and a quarter-mile wide, at an elevation of 5,200 feet in a section of the Bitterroot National Forest that the hiking databases showed no maintained trails accessing. This, to Gordy, was the entire point. No people, he had said, presenting the topo map at my kitchen table 3 months before the trip. No trail. Pristine fishing. 2.5 mile bushwhack from the end of the Forest Service road, through terrain that looks very manageable. He had tapped the contour lines with one finger. This is exactly what I've been looking for. The third member of our group was Preet Sandhu, 30 years old. A pediatric nurse whose outdoor experience was real but more modest than Gordy's. She'd done trail camping, organized group hikes, a few backpacking weekends in well-marked parks. She was joining us partly because we were her people, and she didn't like to miss things, and partly because she was in the specific recovery period after a hard year, a difficult breakup. A hospital department restructuring that had cost her 2 colleagues she'd been close to and had recognized in Gordy's invitation the particular value of physical difficulty in the service of mental reset. I was there because Gordy was my oldest friend and I trusted his outdoor competence implicitly. And because the alternative was a long weekend alone in my apartment, thinking about the job offer I'd been avoiding deciding on for 6 weeks, we drove to western Montana from Missoula on a Thursday in early September, following Forest Service roads that degraded progressively, from gravel to 2-track to something that was technically a road only in the sense that a vehicle had previously been driven along it and the evidence remained. We parked at the end of the passable road at 4 in the afternoon and shouldered our packs. The bushwhack to Millhaven Lake was through mixed conifer forest, lodgepole pine and subalpine fir, the undergrowth thinning at elevation, the ground cover transitioning from the dense shrub layer of lower Montana forest to the open, rock and lichen terrain of the high country. Gordy navigated by compass and topo, moving with confident efficiency. Preet and I followed. Finding our rhythm in the terrain, the lake appeared at the crest of a small ridge, a reveal rather than a gradual approach. The basin suddenly dropping away before us, and the water 300 feet below catching the late afternoon light. It was extraordinarily beautiful in the specific. A stairway of high country wilderness, cold-looking water. The surrounding forests giving way to talus slopes on the northern and western shores. The eastern side, where we would camp, a narrow band of flat, sheltered ground between the water and the trees. No people, Gordy said. With the satisfaction of a prediction confirmed, we descended to the eastern shore and made camp in the last of the light. 3 tents in a loose triangle, fire ring assembled from the flat stones at the water's edge. Dinner organized with the efficiency of people who have camped together enough to know the division of labor without discussing it. Has this lake been named? Preet asked, over dinner. She was looking at the water, which was perfectly still, the stars beginning to appear in its reflection. Not on any official map, Gordy said. I call it Millhaven. After my grandfather's street in Glasgow. It seems very casual, Preet said. Explorers name things after themselves all the time, Gordy said. I'm simply in that tradition. Explorers were usually the first people to go somewhere, I said. The first people to map it, Gordy said. There's a difference. He paused. And the first to name it in English. The land probably has its own name, from the people who were here before any of us. He said this with genuine respect, not as a performance. In my family's tradition, new names coexist with old ones. The lake can have both. It was that kind of evening. The kind of evening that makes the world feel large and good and worth being in. We stayed up until well past midnight, talking and stargazing and letting the day's efforts settle into something like peace. I was asleep by 1 in the morning. I woke at 3:40-7. I know the time because I checked my watch immediately. With the specific precision of a person whose body has decided that knowing the time is critical information. It was 3:47, and there was a figure standing over my sleeping bag. Inside my tent, between me and the pale fabric ceiling that was all that stood between me and the September sky. Do not misunderstand what I mean by figure. I am not describing a silhouette, a shape, an ambiguous darkness that could have been anything. I am describing a person, human in proportion and outline. Standing upright, looking down at me, my tent was a single-person 3-season. Its tent with a footprint of approximately 50 square feet and a peak. Height of 4 feet, not large enough to stand in for a person of any normal height. And yet there standing, the crown of the figure pressing against the tent fabric, deforming it slightly. The pressure of the presence visible in the way the nylon bowed inward against the shape. I did not scream. This is the thing I have never been able to fully explain to anyone. Every rational argument for screaming was available to me. I was alone in a tent in a remote wilderness area with a stranger standing over me. The case for screaming was airtight, but the figure was so still, and the stillness was so complete. And the quality of the attention directed at me from wherever the face of this thing was, directed with a focus that I could feel on my skin. The way you feel sunlight. As a physical phenomenon with a source and a direction, that quality was not threatening, not aggressive. It was the stillness and attention of something that was simply observing, watching me sleep. And now, watching me wake, I lay rigid in my sleeping bag. My heart was doing things that hearts do in moments like this, hammering, irregular, the blood in my ears loud enough to be a sound in itself. But I did not scream. I stared up at the figure, and the figure somehow, in the pitch dark of a tent at 3:40-7 in the morning, looked back, and then it moved, not aggressively, not suddenly. It turned slowly, with the deliberateness of something that does not hurry, toward the tent door, which was zipped shut, which I had zipped myself before sleeping and which I had confirmed even in my terror. Was still fully zipped, the figure moved through the zippered door, not through the fabric, not the dramatic passage of something supernatural through solid matter. More like the figure simply dematerialized in my peripheral vision as I tried to track it. Present at the door and then not present anywhere? The way something is there when you're not looking directly at it and gone when you are. I was alone in the tent. I lay still for what felt like a very long time. My breathing was the loudest sound in the world. Outside the tent, the lake. The wind, very faint, in the high branches of the subalpine fir. The small sounds of the mountain dark, perfectly ordinary, perfectly peaceful. No footsteps. No movement of brush. No sound that indicated a person walking away from the tent. Nothing. At 4:15, I know because I watched the minutes pass on my watch with the desperate attention of someone who has nothing better to anchor themselves to. I unzipped the tent door and looked out. The camp was as we'd left it. 3 tents. Fire ring, the lake beyond, the forest at the back edge of the flat ground, the tailless slopes rising to the north. Everything exactly as it had been at 1 in the morning. No figure. No person. No evidence of anything having been present. I sat in the tent doorway until first light, watching the camp and the tree line and the water. Nothing moved except the lake surface. Stirred by the first morning breeze off the slopes. At 6, I woke Gordy. Gordy listened to me with the full attention. He gives things he is taking seriously, which is a particular quality of his, the ability to switch from easy warmth to genuine focused engagement without transition. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the lake. "You're sure it was inside the tent?" he said. "I'm sure. Not outside the tent?" "Not a shadow from outside. It was between me and the roof. I could see the tent fabric deformed by its height." He nodded slowly. "And the door was zipped when you came out. Fully zipped." It was quiet again. I knew what he was doing, the same thing I had been doing since 4:15. Running the known explanations and checking them against the known facts. Sleep paralysis. Possible, except I had been fully mobile and had watched the figure move and had then watched it disappear. Dream state confusion. Possible, except the tent zipper was verifiably closed. Some kind of partial dreaming. Possible, except the watch time was correct. The physical sensation of cold air when I opened the tent was real. The star pattern I'd checked against the sky was accurate. "We'll look at the ground," he said. "Around your tent. See what's there." I looked. The ground around my tent was the soft, needle-covered soil of the forest edge, excellent for retaining impressions. Gordy's boots left clear marks. Mine left clear marks. Preet, who had emerged from her tent at the sound of our movement and been briefed with admirable conciseness by Gordy, left clear marks when she walked across the soft section to examine it. Around my tent, nothing. Our boot prints from the previous evening's camp setup. My own prints to the tent door, nothing else. "Whatever was in your tent," Gordy said carefully, "left no prints getting there or leaving." "Which means nothing was in your tent," Preet said. She said it gently, clinically, the nurse's tone. "Or nothing that has weight." We looked at each other across the evidence or the absence of evidence. "I'm not questioning your experience," she added. "I'm questioning the category. What you saw may have been real without being physically present in the way that leaves prints. What does that mean?" I asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm a pediatric nurse," not as she paused, looking for the word. "Not a whatever this would require. I'm just saying that I believe you saw something. And I'm pointing out that the physical evidence is consistent with something that doesn't interact with the ground the way physical bodies do." We ate breakfast. We fished. We tried. With the mixed success of people who are competent at managing difficult feelings. To let the morning reestablish normalcy. The lake was cold and clear, and the fishing was genuinely good. Gordy pulled the cutthroat trout by mid-morning with the vocal pride of a man who believes he has personally done something significant by catching a fish, and Preet caught one with no prior fishing experience and was appropriately, if quietly, pleased. I watched the tree line. I'm going to be specific about this. The forest at the eastern edge of our campsite, the tree line between the flat lakeshore ground and the mountain slope, is not obviously threatening. The trees were ordinary subalpine fir, their silhouettes distinctive in the high country way. The undergrowth was sparse at this elevation. The shadows between the trunks were deep, but navigable in daylight. Nothing moved in the tree line that shouldn't move. No silhouettes, no figures, nothing. But there was a quality. A quality I recognized from the inside of the tent at 3:47. The sensation of attention directed from a source I couldn't locate. The feeling of being observed from somewhere specific that I could not identify. "Preet," I said, around midday. She looked at me. "Do you feel it?" She didn't ask what I meant, which told me she did. She turned to look at the tree line. Studied it for a moment with the focused attention she brings to things that matter. Then she said, "Yes, since this morning." She paused. "I thought it was secondary anxiety. From hearing your account, is it?" A long pause. "I don't think so." Gordy, who had been cleaning the fish, looked up at us. He did not ask what we were talking about. He looked at the tree line. He looked for a long moment. Then he said, "Let's keep the camp clean tonight. Food stored properly, nothing that would attract anything." And he paused. "Let's zip our tents from the inside with the secondary lock. The locking clip, not just the zipper. That won't keep out something that doesn't interact with physical barriers," Preet said. "No," Gordy agreed. "But it will mean that if something physical opens the tent from the outside, we'll hear it." He looked at me. "And whatever was in your tent, Theo, even if it left no physical marks, I want to know if something physical gets into mine." That was the first day. We went to bed at 11. The stars were extraordinary, and the lake was a mirror, and I lay inside my zipped, locked tent and listened to the mountain dark and felt, with complete certainty, that something was listening back. Preet woke me at 2:30 with 3 sharp taps on the wall of my tent, our agreed signal. I was awake instantly, the previous night's alarm system still fully online in my nervous system. The adrenaline arriving before consciousness had finished loading. "Outside," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "East tree line. Don't use your headlamp." I unzipped the secondary lock and then the tent door and crawled out into the cold mountain air. Preet was standing 2 feet from her tent, facing the tree line, her arms crossed over her chest against the cold. She was wearing her camp clothes and her boots, which meant she had not been asleep. "How long have you been up?" I whispered. "Since midnight," she said. "I couldn't sleep. And I wanted to watch." She nodded toward the tree line. "Look at the third large fir from the left. Don't look directly. Use your peripheral vision." I looked where she indicated. The night was clear and the moon was in its third quarter, giving enough light to see the tree line with reasonable clarity, the dark shapes of the firs against the slightly lighter sky, the spaces between them filled with mountain shadow. At the third large fir from the left, a shape. Standing very close to the trunk, partially behind it, the outline of a person-shaped thing visible only in peripheral vision, gone when I tried to look at it directly. "How long has it been there?" I whispered. "I first noticed it at 1:15, Preet said. "But I think it was there before that. I think I just didn't see it." "Hey." She paused. "It hasn't moved, has it?" I stopped. "Has it noticed us?" "Yes," she said. "It's been watching the camp the whole time." She said this with a flatness that was not the flatness of indifference. It was the flatness of someone who has already processed the fear and come out the other side into something more functional. It was watching when I couldn't sleep and came outside to look. It was watching before that. "I'm getting Gordy," I said. "He's already awake," Preet said. "He came out 10 minutes ago. He's behind his tent." I looked. Gordy was crouched at the back corner of his tent, facing the tree line, his position giving him a different angle on the figure than Preet had. He raised his hand when I looked at him, the calm, measured gesture of someone who is in control of his alarm, response by sheer force of competence. The 3 of us watched the tree line for 40 minutes. The figure did not move, did not approach, did not retreat. It stood beside the third large fir from the left with the patience of something that had no investment in the passage of time, something that could stand and watch indefinitely without fatigue, without the small, restless movements that humans make when they've been still for too long at some point. Without any observable transition, it was no longer there. No movement. No retreat into the forest. One moment it was present, in peripheral vision, unmistakably a figure-shaped thing positioned at the tree line. The next moment, the tree line was just trees. "Okay," Gordy said, from behind his tent. He stood up and came to where Preet and I were. He was very calm, and his calm was the real kind, not performed, not forced. Gordy's emotional baseline is genuinely steadier than most people's, which is one of the reasons he builds bridges. "I'm going to tell you both something, and I want you to hear it completely before you respond." We looked at him. "I've been coming to backcountry Montana for 15 years, he said. "I know this kind of terrain. I know the wildlife, the geological features, the acoustic phenomena, the ways that darkness and altitude and isolation can distort perception." He paused. "None of those explanations fit what we just watched for 40 minutes. And none of them fit what Theo experienced in his tent last night." He looked at each of us. "I want us to leave in the morning. Not because I'm afraid," he paused, reconsidering that. "Not only because I'm afraid, but because I've learned in 15 years of backcountry travel that when something in a place tells you clearly that you are not supposed to be there, the intelligent response is to listen."
That.
"Something in the place," Preet repeated. "Not someone. Something," Gordy confirmed. "I don't have a more specific word than that, and I'm not going to pretend I do." He looked at the tree line, empty now, just trees and moonlight, just mountain night. "We leave at first light. We hike out, we drive to Missoula, we get a meal that requires a table, and then we figure out what to do about what we saw." Preet and I agreed. We went back to our tents. I did not sleep again, but I did not need to, at 5:45. As the first gray light was building in the east, I heard Gordy's voice outside my tent. Quiet. Steady. "Theo, pack up. Someone walked through camp last night." I came out. He was standing near the fire ring, looking at the ground. There were prints in the soft soil, barefoot, human in scale and proportion. Coming from the direction of the east tree line, passing through the middle of our camp, circling each of the 3 tents once, and then not returning to the tree line, simply stopping. In the center of the camp, between the 3 tents, no departure tracks. The prints arrived and circled and stopped, and after the last print there was nothing. "It was in the camp," Preet said quietly, coming out of her tent to look. "Last night," Gordy said, "while we were watching the tree line," he looked up at us, "while we were watching the figure at the 3rd tree, something else came through the camp. We packed in 15 minutes. The bushwhack out was 2.5 miles of mixed terrain, the same route we'd come in on, reversed. In daylight, with packs on, moving with purpose. In ordinary circumstances, it would have taken us 2 hours. In the circumstances of that morning, it took us 3, because the forest was not behaving the way it had on the way in. I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the account that is hardest to describe without sounding like someone in the grip of hysteria, which we were not. Gordy was navigating by compass and was confident in his bearings. The terrain was legible. The landmarks we'd noted on the way in, a distinctive boulder field, a section of deadfall were all present and accounted for, but the atmosphere of the forest had changed. Not its appearance, the trees were the same trees, the underbrush the same underbrush, the ground the same ground. The change was in the quality of attention, the quality I'd been feeling since the previous morning. The sensation of being observed from an unlocatable source was now not a subtle background sensation. It was the dominant quality of the environment. The forest felt saturated with it. Every stand of trees we moved through felt occupied. Preet was walking between Gordy and me. At one point, about 45 minutes into the hike, she stopped abruptly and put her hand on my arm. "On your left," she said. Her voice was controlled. 12 o'clock of that fallen log. Don't turn quickly. Turn slowly. Beside a fallen lodgepole pine, at a distance of perhaps 30 feet, a figure, standing, the same quality as the one at the tree line, present in peripheral vision, resolving to shadow when looked at directly, but close. 30 feet was close, and the quality of attention from it was the closest. I could get to a physical description, dense, focused, as though whatever was there was pressing its attention against me like weight. Gordy said from the front of our line. He had stopped. He was not looking at it directly. Keep moving. Steady pace. We kept moving. The figures by the time we were halfway to the Forest Service road, because there were more than one, appearing at intervals in the peripheral landscape on both sides of our route, did not approach, did not follow in any way that produced trackable sound or movement. They simply appeared and then ceased to appear, present and then not present. In the way of things that exist at the edge of what the eye can confirm, they're not trying to stop us, Preet said. During a water break at the dry stream channel, she said it analytically, the way she assesses things, from the data available without editorializing. No, Gordy agreed. Yes, they're watching us leave. Yes, he said. That's what it feels like to me, too. Why would something watch us leave? I asked. Neither of them had an answer. We drank our water and kept walking. We reached the Forest Service road and the car at 10:40 in the morning. Getting into the car and hearing the doors close and the engine start was the closest thing to physical relief I have experienced, a sensation in the whole body. Like setting down something very heavy, we drove south for 20 minutes without speaking. Then Preet said from the back seat, "We need to figure out what that was, do we?" I said, I did not mean it facetiously. I meant it as a genuine question about obligation. Did we owe the experience an explanation? I do, she said. I need to understand things. It's how I function. Pause. And I think there's information in this that we haven't found yet. I don't know why I think that, but I do. Gordy glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What kind of information? The kind that explains why it was there, she said. What it wanted? If it wanted anything, she looked out the window at the passing forest. Everything we observed was consistent with watching, with assessment, with the behavior of something that is trying to determine something about us, and I want to know what. She paused. Also, I want a really substantial lunch and a hot shower, in that order, but after those two things, I want to understand this. We drove to Missoula. We got the substantial lunch, a diner with good soup, and a server who clearly found our somewhat shell-shocked demeanor unremarkable, which told me this was a place accustomed to people coming out of the wilderness, looking like they'd had more than they bargained for. We got the hot showers at a motel that had a vacancy sign, didn't ask questions, and then we sat at the small table in Gordy's motel room and we tried to understand. Gordy had a laptop. He was methodical, the way engineers are methodical, starting from the most available information and working outward. He searched the topographic area around Millhaven Lake for any local history, any record of the site, anything that would give the place context beyond a nameless body of water at 5,200 feet. He found two things. The first was a reference in a 1947 Forest Service survey report that mentioned the lake under a different designation, Survey Point 7C, lake unnamed, and included a note by the surveying party that read, "Party declined to camp at Lakeshore. Camped instead at lower elevation. Crew reported discomfort at lakeside during morning reconnaissance. No identifiable cause. Recommend further survey by specialized personnel." The note was not followed up in any subsequent Forest Service document they found. 1947, Preet said. So whatever is there, it was there in 1947. Almost certainly much longer, Gordy said. The survey party's reaction suggests they encountered something they couldn't explain. The specific behavior watching presence. The figures at the tree line matches what we experienced. Same place, 77 years apart. The second thing he found was a reference. In an academic paper on the oral traditions of the indigenous communities of western Montana, a paper published by an anthropologist at the University of Montana in 2019, the paper discussed, among other topics, the concept of certain high country locations described in Salish oral tradition as what translated roughly as the watching places associated with the presence of something the tradition described as neither spirit nor animal, something older than both categories. Something that existed in the landscape before the categories were made. The oral tradition described these places as places where the boundary between the observed and the observer became unclear, where something in the landscape had developed, over vast spans of time, a kind of attention, a capacity to notice. The tradition did not describe these places as dangerous. It described them as requiring care, requiring the correct approach, requiring visitors to understand that in a watching place, the visitor was not the one doing the watching. Preet read the relevant section of the paper twice. Then she set the laptop down and was quiet for a long moment. It was assessing us, she said. The way my grandmother's village back home assesses new people who arrive. Not hostile, just thorough. You have to be known before you can be trusted. We came to a watching place, Gordy said slowly, and the watcher watched us, and we ran away. He laughed, I said. There's a difference, is there? He looked at me. Not challenging, genuinely asking. We observed something we didn't understand and removed ourselves from it as quickly as possible. We didn't engage with it, acknowledge it, try to understand it from its side. He was quiet. The Forest Service survey party did the same thing in 1947. I wonder what they missed. I thought about the figure in my tent, the stillness of it, the quality of the attention, not aggressive, not threatening, just focused, watching, the way you watch something that you need to understand and haven't finished understanding. It was in my tent, I said. Standing over me, watching me sleep. I paused, and I didn't feel afraid, not of it. I felt afraid of not understanding it, if that makes sense. That makes complete sense, Preet said. The fear of the incomprehensible, not the fear of the hostile. She looked at Gordy. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Gordy said carefully, that the intelligent thing to do is go back differently, with appropriate preparation, with an understanding of what the place is and what it requires. Preet looked at me. I thought about the job offer I hadn't decided on, about the supply chain management position that was fine and sensible and that I had been avoiding deciding about for 6 weeks, because it felt like closing a door I hadn't finished looking through. I thought about the figure above me in the dark tent and the total, complete quality of its attention, and how it was the most fully seen I had felt in years. When, I said, we went back the following morning. Not impulsively, we spent the afternoon preparing. The three of us around the motel room table, doing the thing that Preet later described as the most thorough pre-field work brief she'd ever conducted for something that wasn't, technically, a medical procedure. We researched the academic literature on the watching places more thoroughly. We found the anthropologist who'd written the 2019 paper, a woman named Dr. Verna Threefingers, whose office at the University of Montana was 40 minutes from the motel, and Gordy emailed her. She replied within 2 hours, which was either remarkable responsiveness or a sign that she had been expecting some version of this contact, and agreed to a brief phone call. The call lasted 20 minutes. I will summarize what she told us as accurately as I can. She said the watching places were documented in oral tradition across multiple indigenous communities of western Montana and northern Idaho, with enough consistency to suggest a shared foundational knowledge of actual specific locations. She said the academic consensus, to the extent that consensus applied to a field where most researchers had not personally visited these locations, was that the watching places were associated with unusual geological features, specific types of old-growth forest, and elevation bands that created distinctive acoustic and atmospheric conditions. She said that the oral tradition was very specific about the appropriate behavior in a watching place. You went slowly. You went with intention you could articulate. You did not take things nothing from the environment, nothing as a souvenir or sample. You acknowledged that you were being watched openly, without pretense. And you, this was the part she said with the most emphasis, you introduced yourself. Not symbolically. Actually, you said who you were, and what you had come for, and what you intended. The tradition describes the watching places as having a kind of discernment, she said. They can tell the difference between a person who comes with honest intention and a person who comes to take, between a person who acknowledges what they've encountered and a person who dismisses it. The behavior of the place, what you're describing, is consistent with the tradition's description of what happens when people encounter a watching place without. The appropriate acknowledgement, the watching intensifies. The presence makes itself more apparent. What happens, Gordy asked, when people do acknowledge it correctly? A pause. The tradition says the place becomes quieter. Not empty. Not indifferent. But settled. As though the watching has reached its conclusion. She paused again. I've had 3 conversations over the years with people who described experiencing something at a watching place that they could not explain. In each case, the people who acknowledged and introduced themselves described the encounter as meaningful, changed by it in ways that felt positive. The people who ran from it, she paused. They tended to describe a lingering feeling of being watched. For weeks afterward, as though the watching hadn't finished, we thanked her. We prepared in the morning, we drove back to the trailhead. We hiked in the same route, the same 2.5 miles through the same mountain forest. The forest was quiet. The figures, if they were present, were not visible. The feeling of being watched was their faint background. Like the awareness of a room you know is occupied. Even when you can't see into it. We arrived at the lake at noon. We did not make camp. We put our packs down at the lakeshore, and we stood, the 3 of us, facing the eastern tree line, and Gordy spoke. In his clear, carrying voice, the voice he uses when he wants to be heard and understood, we came back. We left yesterday because we were afraid of what we didn't understand. That was the wrong response, and we know it now. Paused. My name is Gordon Fitch. I'm a structural engineer from Missoula. I've been coming to the backcountry of Montana for 15 years, and I've never encountered a place like this one. I came here because I was looking for something real, something that wasn't managed. I think I found it, and I'm asking permission to be here. Her voice was steady and quiet and entirely honest. The quality of a person who has spent years in situations where honesty is the only useful thing. I'm Pret Sandhu. I'm a nurse. I came here because I needed to remember that the world is bigger than the parts of it that have been hard lately. I think this place reminded me of that already, just not in the way I expected. She paused. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know who I am. I was last. I stood at the edge of the lake and looked at the tree line and felt the attention. I'd been feeling since the first night, steady, complete. The focused regard of something that had been watching us since we arrived and was watching us now. My name is Theo Callard, I said. I work in supply chain management, and I've been avoiding a decision for 6 weeks, because I'm afraid of what it means about who I'm becoming. I came here because I needed to be somewhere that asked more of me than my ordinary life does. I paused. The lake was very still. Whatever you are, whatever is here, you were in my tent on Thursday night. You stood over me, and you watched me sleep, and you watched me wake up. And I need you to know that even though I was afraid, I didn't feel like you meant me harm. I felt like you were trying to understand something about me. I stopped. Then, I hope what you found was worth looking for. The forest was still. The lake was still. The mountain afternoon around us was clear and cold and entirely. Perfectly ordinary, and then slowly, the way dawn comes. Not all at once, but in a continuous brightening that you only notice when it's already happened. The quality of the attention changed. It didn't lift. It didn't disappear. But it changed. From the focused, searching attention of something that hasn't finished, deciding to something softer. Something that had reached its conclusion. Something that had, I believed, and I believe it still decided. We stayed for 4 hours. We did not set up tents. We did not fish. We sat by the lake in the September afternoon, and we were present in the place, fully and honestly present. Not managing the experience, or documenting it, or trying to extract something useful from it. Just there. The lake and the mountain and the old forest and whatever was in the old forest, and the 3 of us on the lakeshore with our packs and our honest intention and nothing to prove. The figures did not appear, not at the tree line. Not in peripheral vision, not in any form I could discern, but the absence was not emptiness. The watching places, Dr. Three Fingers had said, become quieter when the watching reaches its conclusion. Not empty, not indifferent. Settled. That was the quality of those 4 hours. Settled. As though something that had been held in suspension had resolved into a steadier state, Gordy sat with his boots off, his feet on the cold stone at the lake's edge, looking at the water with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not peaceful exactly. More like located. The expression of a person who has found where they are on a map that matters. Preet walked the shoreline for the first hour. Slowly, in the way of someone whose nervous system needs movement to process, she came back and sat beside me and said without preamble, "I think I'm going to be okay. About last year, about the things that were hard." She said it matter-of-factly, the way she says things that are important. I think this helped. The terrifying watching presence helped, I said. Yes, she said. The perspective. The reminder that the world is full of things we haven't categorized yet. That being unknown isn't the same as being small. She paused. I've been feeling small for about 10 months. This stopped that. I sat and looked at the lake and thought about the job offer. The supply chain position that was fine and sensible, and that had been sitting in my decision queue for 6 weeks because saying yes felt like settling and saying no felt like pride. And I couldn't figure out which one was true. What I understood? Sitting at the edge of Gordy's Lake in the September afternoon with the forest quiet around us, was that the decision wasn't actually about the job. It was about what I was afraid of, which was not failure. I knew how to handle failure, but invisibility. Becoming someone who went through their days without anyone or anything paying full attention to what was actually there. The figure in the tent had paid full attention to what was actually there. In the most uncomfortable way possible, the 3-40-7- the morning dark of a remote mountain campsite. Something I could not explain had looked at me completely and without qualification, and whatever it had found, it had kept looking. It had come back to the tree line. It had walked through the camp. It had found me worth watching. I don't think I'd felt that in a long time. Not the being watched feeling which I associated with evaluation and judgment. The being seen feeling. The sense that something was looking at the actual thing rather than the version of it that fit neatly into existing categories. At 5 o'clock, Gordy stood up and said it was time to hike out before the light failed. We shouldered our packs and stood for a moment at the lakeshore, the 3 of us, looking at the water and the forest and the mountain. "Thank you," Preet said. "To the place?" Simply and without embarrassment. "Thank you," Gordy said. I didn't say anything. I looked at the eastern tree line, the trees where the figures had stood, where the watching had been most focused, and I held the gaze for a moment. The way you hold a gaze with a person when you want them to know they've been received. Then, I turned and started up the slope. The hike out was 2.5 miles and took an hour and 50 minutes. The forest was ordinary mountain forest. Beautiful in the September afternoon light, the lodgepole and fir in their specific highland forms, the undergrowth thinning as we gained elevation. The feeling of being watched was gone. Fully, completely gone in a way I could feel as an absence. The way you feel the absence of a sound you've grown so accustomed to you stop noticing it. Until it stopped, no figures at the periphery. No quality of attention from the trees, just forest. Just the mountain. Just us hiking out. I accepted the job offer on the Tuesday after we got back from Montana. Not because the watching place told me to, it didn't tell me anything. Not in language, not in any form I could directly transmit. But because I understood, with a clarity I hadn't had before, what the 6 weeks of avoidance had actually been about. I was afraid of being invisible. Of doing work that didn't require the full version of me. Of becoming someone who went through the days without friction or challenge or the specific discomfort of being asked to be entirely present. The watching place had asked me to be entirely present. It had not been comfortable. It had been one of the most frightening experiences of my life. But it had also been, and I'm using this word carefully, understanding that it sounds strange in the context of waking up to a figure standing over me in a tent at 3 a.m, it had also been a relief, being fully seen. Even by something I couldn't explain. Even in conditions that activated every fear response I had was a relief. It confirmed that there was something there to be seen, that I was not, in fact, invisible. I accepted the position. not the sensible one. The other offer, the one from the small manufacturing startup that was going to require more of me, that was less certain and less comfortable, and that had been sitting in my queue alongside the sensible offer. The one I'd been not quite looking at for 6 weeks. The one that scared me. I emailed my acceptance, and then I called Gordy and told him, "What changed?" he asked. "I got watched by something that doesn't exist in any category I have," I said, "and it found me worth the attention. It felt wrong to waste that." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I've been making calls this week. About the lake property. There's a process for formally recognizing it as a cultural heritage, site working with the relevant tribal nations to get proper protections in place. The Salish community has a cultural preservation office. I spoke to someone there." A pause. "She knew about the lake. She didn't call it Millhaven. She told me its actual name in the Salish language. She said the watching places don't need to be managed or preserved in the Western sense. They've been there long before any of us, and they'll be there long after. But she appreciated that I called, that I acknowledged what was there." "What's its actual name?" I asked. "I'm not going to repeat it," he said. "It's not mine to repeat, but I know it now. And it feels right that the place has its name, and I know it, even if I don't say it." Preet called me the following week. She'd gone back to work. She said it was different, not easier, not harder, but different in the specific way of doing something you've remembered why you do. I was treating patients, and I could feel the difference between being present with them and going through the motions, she said. I'd been going through the motions for months and didn't realize it until I wasn't. A pause. "Whatever happened up there, it recalibrated something." "The watching," I said. "The being watched," she said. "The being required to be actually there, not a version of there. It reminded me what that feels like." She paused. "I think I needed the reminder. It has been 7 months. I think about the figure in the tent sometimes, the one that stood over me at 3:47 in the morning, in the cold dark of a remote Montana mountain, and watched me wake with the focused, patient attention of something that had all the time it needed to understand what it was looking at. I think about what it found, what it concluded. I do not find this frightening anymore. I find it sustaining. The knowledge that something, somewhere, looked at me with complete and unhurried attention and found enough to keep looking. That is not nothing. In a world that is very fast and very loud and very full of things competing for partial attention, that is not nothing at all. Dr. Verna Threefingers published a follow-up paper in the spring, 7 months after our trip. She had interviewed us as part of her research. Long conversations, careful and thorough, conducted with the academic rigor of someone who takes her subjects seriously without taking herself too seriously. We are in the paper as anonymous subjects. Our experience described in the clinical language of academic anthropology. 3 individuals reported encounters consistent with oral tradition descriptions of watching place behavior. I read the paper twice. The conclusion that stayed with me was this: the watching places, as described across multiple oral traditions, are not anomalies. They are not exceptions to the normal behavior of the natural world. They are instances of the natural world doing something it has always been capable of paying attention at a scale and with a consistency that makes the attention visible to the people who enter it. The natural world watches. This is not metaphor. It is documented scientifically in the behavior of ecosystems, in the responsiveness of old-growth forests to the presence of organisms within them, in the chemical and acoustic and geological systems that register and respond to events at their scale of existence. The watching places are, Dr. Threefingers argues, locations where these capacities have concentrated, where the geography and the age and the specific ecology of a place have produced something that functions for practical purposes like attention, not human attention, not animal attention. Something older than either. Something that predates the categories we use to understand. Attention, and has been doing its watching since before those categories existed. I woke up at the campsite to someone standing over me. What was standing over me was not a person. It was not a threat. It was something I will never fully understand. using the only method available to it: presence, attention. The specific and total focus of a thing that watches to try to understand me. I hope it succeeded. I hope that whatever it found in the 347 darkness of a nameless lake in western Montana was worth the effort. I hope that somewhere in the old forest above Gordy's Lake, in the watching place that the Salish people have known by its real name for longer than any map has existed, something is settled. Something reached its conclusion. Something that has been watching the mountain for centuries found, in 3 improbable people, in 2 improbable nights, enough to satisfy what it was looking for. And I hope that if you go into the back country, into any wild place, any old forest, any place where the ground is old and the trees have been there longer than any road, you go knowing that the world you are entering has eyes, not to frighten you. To know you, go with your name ready. Go with honest intention. Go knowing you are the newcomer, that what has been in that place before you is worth acknowledging. You are being watched. Let yourself be seen. End.